What institution do you trust? Who do you trust? This week, the director of the FBI, Chris Wray, appeared before the Senate. He gave a testimony about the state of the FBI. The FBI, of course, is part of the greater criminal justice system and law enforcement in America. And the greater criminal justice system and law enforcement in America are suffering from a decline in trust among institutions. It's no mystery why. I mean, we can take a quick lap around the last 12 months of the news cycle to understand why you or I or the average American doesn't trust the FBI. John Paul Mac Isaac sat with us here on the Cain Podcast. He told us how his father approached the field office in Albuquerque with Hunter Biden's laptop, and he was rebuffed. He was turned away. How he then, in turn, approached the FBI, and all that resulted in was a tale and surveillance that he could tell that the subject of suspicion wasn't Hunter Biden, it was John Paul Mac Isaac. Eventually, he turned over that computer to Rudy Giuliani, and not until there was a public stink was there some attention that really is just now starting to turn to not just Hunter Biden, but the president of the United States, Joe Biden. Why? There's a new report out this week in the Daily Mail that a Chinese energy company met with Joe Biden, then Vice President Joe Biden in 2014. Now get this, 15 times in the West Wing while Joe Biden was vice president. And oh, by the way, after those meetings, Hunter Biden received an email from one of those Chinese energy executives saying, I overheard you saying your Fisker electric vehicle, a vehicle that cost well into six figures, might be having some trouble when it comes to service. Can we be of service? Says this Chinese executive. This Chinese energy fund, and let's not beat around the bush, says the Chinese Communist Party. Nothing in China, especially the highest levels of business, is disconnected from the Chinese Communist Party. So the Chinese Communist Party, by extension, is meeting with the then Vice President of the United States no less than 15 times and offering quid pro quo courtesies to his son, and that is of no interest to the FBI. Whistleblowers inside the DOJ and the FBI have written letters to Republican senators saying, this is not right. This is not good. We need to be paying attention not just to Hunter Biden, but the FBI. And Director Wray appeared before the Senate, and here's what he had to say. Yeah, I should say that's concerning, but concerning at this point is, other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? It's cheap well wishes when you're lying on your deathbed. It's a wave of the hand as you rubberneck a car accident instead of pulling over to render aid. It's worse than that because it's the police or an ambulance blowing kisses to a wreck on the side of the road instead of pulling over and doing their job. The FBI has no interest, apparently, in corruption at the highest levels of the American government. Potential corruption, alleged corruption at the highest levels of the American government. Instead, by the way, the FBI is concerned in domestic terrorism. And domestic terrorism is defined by, or at least symbolized by, the Betsy Ross flag, the Gadsden flag, and the Gonzales flag, which you'll recognize with its moniker, Come and Take It. That's from Project Veritas, by the way. Project Veritas is saying that the FBI has put out a list of symbols you should watch for as signs of domestic terrorism. The FBI is concerned about that. The FBI is accused of entrapment in creating a plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitman of Michigan. The FBI is being questioned in Congress about its involvement, not just its investigation, but its involvement before the fact and the riots of January 6th. And the FBI has no interest in alleged potential corruption at the highest levels of the American government. And you wonder why, according to Gallup, trust in that institution in law enforcement, of which we have to include the FBI, is down to around 16%. By the way, law enforcement is not alone. I asked you, what institution do you trust? Again, according to Gallup poll. It's not public schools. 28% of people trust that institution. That's compared to over half of Americans in the 1970s. 16% trust newspapers. That's down as well, even from 2011. How about Congress? 7%, greatly or to a large extent, trust Congress. The President of the United States, 23%. This is as of 2022. The police, 25%. Criminal justice at large, 14%. Big business, 14%. There's no institution who's retained the trust of the American people. And why would they? Let's talk about some of those institutions. The CIA. How about intelligence apparatus? Well, 56 of the America's most famous and highest level spooks wrote a letter once information in the public, in the press, came out about Hunter Biden and his laptop, and it was immediately dismissed by 56 of those highest level spies as Russian disinformation, something we now know was disinformation, meaning that information from those 56 members of the intelligence community and the CIA. How about the science community at large? I mean, look, science is wielded as religion. I trust science. Isn't that the yard sign that goes along with in this house we love? In this house we believe Black Lives Matter. In this house we believe in science. Isn't it part of that whole litany of virtues one signs up for with a yard sign? Science, which as a community dismissed the origins of COVID-19 for the better part of a year and suggested any questions about the origins of COVID-19 were, quote, a conspiracy. Science is at an all-time low as well. Do you trust that community at large? Do you trust that institution, science? Let's bore in. How about more specifically? Do you trust doctors? Do you trust the medical community? According to Gallup, today, that figure sits at 30%, greatly or to a large extent, trust medicine. Why would that be so low? Well, could it be that medicine for years now has pushed a conversation suggesting there is absolutely no downside to a COVID-19 vaccine? Does that pass muster? Does that pass the smell test? Does that pass common sense, much less science? Or even beyond the lack of recognition of a downside, simply doing the mathematical equation of risk-reward when it comes to children. Is it appropriate? What type of risk does COVID present to children? How does that compare to the potential downside and risk of the vaccine? You can't entertain that thought. This podcast will now be flagged by Spotify and YouTube and Facebook. Why? Because I dare to entertain the idea there's a cost-benefit analysis, a risk-reward analysis. You must parrot the oh-so-trustworthy institution of medicine. Let's stay on medicine. How about this? From the American Association of Pediatrics, new AAP guidance on quote-unquote gender-affirming care. That's the euphemism, gender-affirming care. Here's the new guidance from the AAP. Again, the acronym doesn't do justice to who exactly is sharing this guidance. The American Association of Pediatrics. Quote, there is strong consensus among the most prominent medical organizations worldwide that evidence-based gender-affirming care for transgender youth and adolescents is medically necessary and appropriate. This is gender-affirming care, the euphemism that is now being used to push medical treatment for children who are considered to be transgender. And I say who are considered because we don't let children decide they should get a tattoo. It's against the law in most states for example, 13 or 14-year-olds go get a tattoo. We don't let children sign up for the military, but we let children define themselves according to a gender and then medically transition themselves with the imprimatur, the go-ahead, the green light, the high five from the American Association of Pediatrics. What am I talking about specifically? Puberty blockers, hormone treatment, the likes of which are used, by the way, the same exact drug for chemical castration of pedophiles. I'm serious. The criminal justice system, chemical castration of pedophiles are what the American Association of Pediatrics are also saying is quote unquote gender affirming care for children. This is the medical community. By the way, the medical community, the American Medical Association, dating back several years now, has said that the definition of a woman is, quote, more complicated than the simple binary that XY and XX chromosomes have used to define gender for decades. And you wonder why no one just goes, well, or very few of us anymore go, well, doctor. What institution do you trust? There's no institution left that retains and should retain the trust of the American people. That inherited credibility that was perhaps unearned in previous decades. The media's, I would offer you, no more biased today than it was in the 1950s or 60s. It was just cloaked in gravitas and credibility with Walter Cronkite. And I know that's sacrilege, perhaps, to older listeners. But Walter Cronkite was biased, and I don't have to really let you guess in which direction. The entire apparatus was and always has been. Congress, every institution has always been this way. Today, it is simply undeniable. And that's why there's so little trust in institutions. It's earned. So I said it two ways at the beginning of this conversation. What do you trust? What institution do you trust? Who do you trust? That's the more appropriate question. American institutions are at the beginning of a revolution. The beginning of a revolution, there's a lot of thrashing and gnashing of teeth. Every cornered dying animal fights for his life. These institutions are cornered dying animals. They will thrash, they will flail, but they will eventually die. With what will they be replaced? This is the positive turn in our conversation. Perhaps they'll be replaced by something that's created by you or your children or somebody that shares your values. Perhaps there's that parallel economy. Perhaps there's a community of shared values. There is definitely an entrepreneurial opening. Colleges, doctors, scientists, engineers, law enforcement. There are good individuals ready to create, ready to earn trust. And that leads us to who do you trust? That's now a question for individuals, not institutions. Do you trust me? That's my job to earn your trust, to subject myself to criticism, to put myself in check, to more frequently bring on those who disagree. Because the question in the future has to be, who do you trust? I hope I can earn. The answer might one day be The Will Cain Show. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain Podcast for full episodes right now.